So to start this video, I thought I'd just say happy holidays to everybody who is watching. I don't know if you're watching later on or afterwards, but happy holidays. 2020 has been a crazy year, and I think we all expected Cyberpunk 2077 to at least end the year on a high note. And to say this launch has been disastrous would be an understatement, but I think we're all hopeful that 2021 we can see this game turn around and have a very bright future. There's a lot of things to look forward to. Obviously, we have free DLC that's supposed to be in the horizon. Who knows if that may be delayed or not because of the big bug fixes that Projekt Red have been focused on the last couple of weeks. And then we have the story expansions. Again, that's something that we don't know when it's supposed to be coming. I would assume that the first one was probably supposed to come mid-year. Maybe that'll be pushed off to the fall, but there is some really exciting things to look forward to with Cyberpunk 2077. And if you have finished the game, you know that there are some questions and some really cool ideas and things that they could do with future DLC. And hopefully I'll talk about that in a video in the coming days, because I think there's a lot of really neat things that Projekt Red could do, and also I just want to talk about the endings and story DLC and stuff like that. But yeah, today we have a lot of Cyberpunk 2077 to discuss. We have some sales numbers that have come in from Projekt Red. We have some massive outrage over journalist hot take, which even got multiple Projekt Red developers to lash out at them. And then we have some more news on the latest hotfix, which brought a huge fix to the game, and there's a couple of other things. But as usual, if you do enjoy this video, consider subscribing for more content like this. But nonetheless, let's actually get to this update coming from Reuters, which confirms that Projekt Red has sold 13 million copies of Cyberpunk 2077 through December 20th. This is included with refunds. Remember that pre-orders, I believe Cyberpunk 2077 had 8 million copies, so I guess the last 10 days or so they sold another 5 million copies, and who knows how many refunds were granted, but that's the total, 13 million. That still is extremely successful for this game. That just shows you how much hype and anticipation was behind it, because I would imagine that a lot of those sales came in launch day. But now who knows, because PlayStation right now, Cyberpunk 2077 isn't on that digital store, which definitely is going to hurt, because Projekt Red's executives clearly were putting a lot of their money on this huge holiday season, and now that's kind of been tarnished with all the controversy surrounding the game and the fact that it's not on the PlayStation store. But regardless, let's get to this report from Reuters, which points out that investors, even that 13 million copies, they are not happy by that. A futuristic role-playing game featuring Hollywood star Keanu Reeves, Cyberpunk 2077 was widely seen as one of the biggest premieres this year. This figure represents the estimated volume of retail sales across all hardware platforms, CD Projekt said about the 13 million copies sold. The company had not given sales forecasts and did not disclose how many refund requests it had received, but the sales fell short of market expectations of 16.4 million copies, said analyst Peter Boygas at M-Bank Brokerage. While the number ranks Cyberpunk as one of the top-selling titles this year, it implies lower PC sales or higher refunds on consoles than we anticipated after launch, likely due to the various bugs and performance issues on PCs other than the high-performance ones, Jefferies analyst said in a note. The game release on December 10th got off to a rocky start after a backlash over technical glitches led Sony to pulling it from the PlayStation Store and Xbox maker Microsoft offering refunds. The game's troubled rollout sent CD Projekt shares tumbling 40% from a record touched before its release. The shares were down 5% as of 8 o'clock on Wednesday after opening higher. Now, we've talked about the refund policy for Cyberpunk 2077 opening up for the PlayStation Store, Microsoft Store, and even Best Buy got in on the fun, although a little bit more limited. But now it actually appears GameStop has got in on the fun. This is a report coming from Kotaku. GameStop has joined the growing number of retailers that are fully refunding customers who bought Cyberpunk 2077. The memo instructs GameStop employees to accept the game returns on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, even if the game has been opened, and label the games as defective before shipping them back to the GameStop warehouse. So ultimately, I actually do think that when Projekt Red reveals the newer numbers, probably in the early part of 2021, they're not going to look pretty, because right now there's just mass refunds that are continuing to happen, and rightfully so. And then there's also the fact that the game's just not available on one of the biggest platforms in the world for consoles. So Projekt Red's going to hurt, and early 2021, and it's all going to be dependent on the updates and the fixes that they make to the game, which will decide if this game has a huge comeback story or it starts to turn it around No Man's Sky style in 2021. But the good news is, over the last week or so, we've seen the CD Projekt Red development team working hard with delivering as many hotfixes and patches as possible, and we actually got probably the final one of the year with hotfix 1.006, which came the other day, and it included some massive changes and fixes. And it's actually only 3 changes, but they're huge, because one of them is an issue that a lot of PC players were reporting. They were having their saves corrupted, which essentially meant that they were losing dozens upon dozens of hours of gameplay and were forced to restart from the beginning. This is an issue that was plaguing all kinds of players and making a lot of them just not want to play on PC until this was fixed, because essentially if your save went over, I guess, 8 megabytes, you were playing with fire, basically, because it appears if you did too much crafting or looting, or if you did one of the item duplication glitches, then you could lose everything. But CD Projekt Red has now put out a fix. This is the patch notes. It's very quick. It says, they did fix one quest bug, which was Dum Dum will no longer go missing from Totentant's entrance during second conflict. And then there was a console-specific change in which they improved the memory management stability, resulting in fewer crashes. Again, great news here, means that console players can have a smoother experience. That's still going to take a lot more work, but it's a great start so far. We've seen that CD Projekt Red has definitely improved console performance over the last couple of weeks, which also just shows what would have been possible if this game was delayed to April 2021, or sometime in the beginning part of next year, like it should have been. And then the big PC-specific change. They removed the 8 megabyte save file size limit. Note, this won't fix save files corrupted before the update, but no more save file corruption should be happening afterwards. And I believe that this issue wasn't, I guess, possible on console, as a lot of players were already reporting that their save files were beyond 8 megabytes. So this is great news. It appears that one of the biggest issues for Cyberpunk 2077 has been solved, and if you're curious about the file size for this new hotfix, it's about 500 megabytes on GOG. On Steam, I think it's like about a gigabyte, and then on console, I don't know why this is, but I'm guessing because they're adjusting base files and such, so you have to re-download it, but it's about 15 gigabytes on the Xbox One. Not sure about PlayStation 4, but either way, this is definitely a step forward for Cyberpunk 2077, and I think a lot of people are going to be extremely happy about these changes. Now, I do have to say, with this whole ordeal surrounding the save corruption massive issue, the communication at CD Projekt Red's gotta get better, because it really was kind of baffling how they were handling this. Like, on the support page for this specific issue, it just essentially said, yeah, you're kind of screwed. And there was no indication that this was, though, they were working on a fix. And then even worse, on the CD Projekt Red forums, a moderator, which is representing this company, went on a little rant or tirade about how this game's not meant to be played endlessly, and it's not meant to be played like Dark Souls, GTA, or an MMO. It's meant to be restarted from the beginning with a new character and played differently. Love it or loathe it, that's the design. So they went on a rant saying that this game's not meant to be played for like 100 hours or so, which is just ridiculous. And essentially what they were saying was just don't play the game. Don't craft thousands of items at once. Is that ideal? No. And hopefully they'll be worked around in the future, although maybe not. No game that CDPR has ever created has ever been designed for ongoing unlimited play. Well, that was their excuse for this issue, which is just baffling, but like I said, the communication's got to get better. It seems they were working on this issue the whole time, and that's why I don't understand why somebody couldn't go on the official support Twitter account and say, hey, we're working on a fix. That would have made a lot of PC players more reassured, but regardless, communication's got to get better. So as I was recording this video, we actually have some huge breaking news, and this goes along with the subject of my last video on Cyberpunk 2077, in which we discussed upcoming lawsuits against the company over misleading investors and the public on the state of the game on last generation consoles, and those lawsuits have begun, and it actually appears to be worse than I expected, because 4 law firms are preparing to file lawsuits against CD Projekt Red. So the first one that has now been filed is Rosen Law Firm files securities class action lawsuit against CD Projekt. According to the lawsuit, defendants throughout the class period made false and/or misleading statements and/or failed to disclose that Cyberpunk 2077 was virtually unplayable on the current generation Xbox or PlayStation systems due to an enormous number of bugs. 2. As a result, Sony would remove Cyberpunk 2077 from the PlayStation Store, and Sony, Microsoft, and CD Projekt would be forced to offer full refunds for the game. 3. Consequently, CD Projekt would suffer reputational and pecuniary harm. And 4. As a result, defended statements about its business operations and prospects were materially false and misleading and/or lacked a reasonable basis at all relevant times. When the true details enter the market, the lawsuit claims that investors suffered damages. And that is true, because a lot was riding on Cyberpunk 2077, and because the game has had such a messy, nightmarish launch, CD Projekt stock has dropped by 40%. And really there's no indication that it's going to blast on up to what it was before launch, and honestly, it is true that CD Projekt's reputation is never going to be the same with gamers and probably investors. There was just so much hype and anticipation behind this game, and it fell flat because of some horrible decision making that was made by the executives at the company. Now, what makes this even worse is the fact that this is just the first of 4 law firms that are planning to file a lawsuit against CDPR. Daniel Ahmad, a video game analyst, taking to Twitter saying, the argument being that the company misled investors in a deceptive way about the quality of the game on last-gen consoles, which led to recent negative impact at the expense of the investing public. And you could really say that's true. I mean, when CD Projekt's CEO comes out and says that the last gen runs surprisingly well and it actually turns out that's not the case at launch, then there's going to be cases like this being made by law firms. And yeah, this is just the beginning of CDPR's legal problems with this whole mess. But Daniel Ahmad continues, he says the basis for this comes after 1. CDPR released the game despite being unplayable for majority of players. 2. Negative impact from Sony delisting, refunds on all platforms. 3. CDPR admitting that they did not show last-gen footage as they had not finished that version yet, something that they didn't tell investors, which investors would have wanted to know. But Daniel continues, he says, I've seen a few people saying, didn't investors pressure them to get it out? That's not quite the case. The argument is more like, investor, is the game good? Can you release it this year? CDPR, it's all good, bro. Cyberpunk 2077 releases, investor, WTF was that? And then he gives a link to the filing. Quote below is from before the launch of the game when CDPR was asked about the delay. During that call, and I don't think we've seen this quote before, but it's even more damaging. It says, from one of CDPR's executives responded to an investor question, I wouldn't say there's a problem because there's nothing wrong with the Xbox or PlayStation 4 versions. There is optimization to be handled also because of how we were approaching things from the get-go in terms of development, so there is no problem with the Xbox or PlayStation 4, to be honest. And yeah, that did not age well. It aged as well as milk does. Yikes. It's hard for me to say how successful the lawsuit will be. I'm not a lawyer, but that 4 law firms are taking it on does say something. And yeah, it does. I've been saying the executives' misleading and false statements would come back to bite them, and now the legal fight begins. With this lawsuit, it's been said Rosen's lawyers are seeking an unnamed amount of damages for investors, but remember, there are still 3 more lawsuits and maybe even more that await CDPR. As of recording, CDPR's stock has continued to tumble. Now, something else that's been going on with Cyberpunk 2077 that I want to quickly address is just some really bad hot takes that have continued to come in, including one that actually got the attention of multiple developers. So, let's talk about this tweet that's gone viral, or this article from Paste Magazine. This is the title, I'm not joking with you. Cyberpunk 2077 is the game of the year in the same way that Hitler was Times Man of the Year. What are you doing? They're comparing a Polish developer, Polish people, was it 6 million people lost their lives during World War II to the Germans? Oh my god. But anyway, yeah, they compared a Polish developer to Adolf, and this is what they specifically say in the article. They say Cyberpunk 2077 is truly the game of the year because it represents all the problems holding the industry back, because the size and scope of its failure is so massive. Cyberpunk 2077 is the game of the year in the same way Hitler was Times Man of the Year in 1938, not as an award or an accolade, but as a warning and admonishment to the rest of the world. And no, we are in no way comparing a bad game to history's greatest monster. You're doing just that. This is what an example of Godwin's rule. But if you're looking for an example of when an award isn't really an award, Time kind of set the standard back at 38. You don't need to make this comparison. You should not have made this comparison. And a lot of people are actually pointing out that this article probably should be taken down just because of how awful of a take this is. And I think CD Projekt Red staff would agree with that, because multiple of them reached out on Twitter and voiced their displeasure with this piece. Pavel Kopla, a game designer at CDPR, saying, note to self, make everything you do absolutely perfect or you eventually will be compared to Hitler. Then we had Philip Weber, one of the senior quest designers coordinators on the game, saying, I'll say it delicate as I can, but seriously, F off. For a bit of context, as a German living and working in Poland, I find using these kind of comparisons for the sake of a spicy take extremely distasteful. And then we had Andrzej Zawodowski, the senior game designer at CDPR, saying, making a comparison like this is beyond disrespectful and shows absolute lack of empathy. Think what you want about the game, but this is just too much. And then another CD Projekt Red developer, Pavel Panasiuk, saying, write an article, tweet the link to it, retweet it, your own tweet to your own article, change the approach, make it even more shocking. Paste Magazine, I imagine it comes from copy and paste just like the content. It's the epitome of what's wrong with journalism these days. Those were CD Projekt Red developers lashing out at this, and there's an interesting detail that needs to be mentioned about this piece, because the original article, the original tweet about this article, this is what it said. It said, Cyberpunk 2077's multiple failures sums up everything wrong with the video game industry. That makes it the real game of the year. And you want to know how much engagement that tweet got? It got 5 retweets, 9 quote tweets, 14 likes. And then you want to know the spicy take, which included the mention to Adolf. That one got like 5,000 quote tweets. I think it's up to like 8 or 9 now. They did this for clickbait. That's basically what I'm trying to say here, people. And it worked. But yeah, the reputations and the garbage. I mean, the only time we've talked about Paste Magazine on this channel is because of garbage takes. Some of you may remember this, but with Red Dead Redemption 2, they accused Rockstar Games of red and blackface because of the character of Charles Smith, who wasn't played by a Native American, but by, I believe, an African American and Parsi actor. I believe that's who No Sheer Dalal is. But yeah, there was a lot of outrage over that piece, and I remember discussing it, and here they are once again with one of their hot takes, which is just god-awful. But there was also some other individuals that got in on this article calling it out for what it is, which is trash. But yeah, we had Roger Clark, the performance actor of Arthur Morgan in Red Dead Redemption 2, saying that's a pretty harsh and unnecessary comparison. Then we had Mike Gamble, the one of the project leads at BioWare, saying, imagine being one of the developers who worked really hard on a game and are still working hard on hotfixes into the holiday and seeing this headline. Shame on you. Then we had Gabe Gerwin, GameSpot editor, and yeah, there's a lot of journalists that are absolutely outraged by this as well. But Gabe said, gonna see if my relatives who died fighting the World War II Germans were also this angry about a buggy game. Mike Drucker saying, I'm somewhat certain a buggy game made under bad working conditions is not the same as being the man who did that. And then it goes on. And there was just lots of outrage, but maybe that accomplished Paste Magazine's goal, which was to, I guess, create some outrage over this. And I guess that worked, but they probably got some good clicks, but I don't know, their reputation's down the toilet. And when everybody's laughing at you and calling you out for a really bad take, then you really know you screwed up badly. But this overall piece, it wasn't even that bad compared to some of the hot takes I've seen on Cyberpunk 2077. I did find this point laughable in it, in which they said that it was clear years ago that it would have a lowbrow sense of humor that routinely punched down with rampant misogyny and phobia and the kind of vulgar and juvenile jokes that only seem mature to those weird middle school kids who like to carve naked women into their school desks. Just like I said, hot takes around. This is what's everything surrounding this game right now. But they continued later on saying, so yeah, the story has it all with Cyberpunk 2077. It's a broken game that caters to the lowest common denominator and is suffused with toxic masculinity, whose development was so severely mismanaged that it took years of inhumane working conditions to put out an unfinished game by a release date that had already been delayed 3 times, and whose most toxic fans were proved to first attack journalists who pointed out legitimate problems with it, and eventually, after the magnitude of its brokenness was evident, the designers who made it. This is the ultimate example of what the video game business has become, a noxious cesspool built on anger and exploitation by a management class that doesn't respect its employees, the press, or its customers, and that has spent decades pandering to the most hostile instincts of its fans. And you want to know about this article? Nobody's at all going to listen to what you had to say because you decided to include that really unnecessary figure inside the title of this and in the first couple of sentences. And the only reason why you did that was for clicks. I mean, let's just be honest here. But yeah, the Cyberpunk 2077 hot takes are not the reason why I'm just not surprised. We've talked about this for years. And then there's also just numerous other ones that have come around. Like we have The Guardian and their review of the game. I think they gave the game like a 60. But they said, amid the excitement, there are many troubling aspects within Cyberpunk 2077. How unoriginal the writers to posit that a technocratic dystopia will inevitably involve the misogynistic commodization of female-presenting bodies with android adult dolls, gyrating holographic lap dancers, and ads for X-rated TV shows with titles such as Watson Horrors playing out on every screen. I think that was kind of the point, people. I guess they just don't understand the Cyberpunk franchise. But furthermore, the representation of the powerful Arasaka family as elitist Japanese colonizers revolted by the American way of life recalls the dehumanizing yellow peril sci-fi of the early 20th century without ever really integrating it in a convincing way. Again, this is coming from a person of color, Mike Pondsmith. This is his franchise. He did all of this. He invented all of this. It's not like this was all brought up by CD Projekt Red, and he also consulted on this game. So I don't get this criticism, and I just think that a lot of the people that are getting outraged over this game are just looking to be outraged. Like, we have this New Zealand article who accused the game of appropriation because of a face tattoo. The inclusion of this tattoo in Cyberpunk 2077 has left a gamer and design consultant shocked by the hyped dystopian video game. As a gamer, it doesn't ruin the entire game, but it casts a shadow on it for me as an indigenous person. And again, this is a role-playing game. Maybe CD Projekt Red was going out of their way to give those indigenous individuals a way to make their ultimate character in Cyberpunk 2077. And, well, they continue, said Morgana Watson, the creative director of MW Cult Consultancy and 4-Phase Games. I can't in good conscience play a game when I know that they've just taken something sacred from our people just because it looks cool. I know it looks cool, but that's not any reason at all just to steal it. Then they continue on. Cultural appropriation is rife in the gaming industry. Game producer Ian Ramsey echoed that sentiment, saying appropriating imagery is endemic in the industry and is not limited to that art style. And it goes on and on. Another news reporter says, this is an absolute ignorance in the day and age of Google. That's just absolute stupidity, and it goes on and on. But essentially, they're upset because the character creator has a face tattoo that looks somewhat similar to their cultural tattoos on their face or under their mouth, I guess. Even then, I think that's kind of a reach, but hey, I guess just using a tattoo which is honoring a culture is stealing nowadays in this day and age. I don't get it personally myself. I just feel like people are getting outraged for any reason at all with Cyberpunk 2077. Like, now let's discuss the next hot take. This one coming from Fanbyte, another website that we talked about on this channel before because they just have some of the worst takes on video games. But yeah, let's listen to their review cast in which they say some of the most absolutely insane things about this game.
The racism in this game is harmful in many ways because it is racism. But the racism in this game is so lazy that it's like they've never heard a non-white person speak before, and they just went on YouTube and typed in black people, and then they were like, this is what they sound like.
So just to pause there for a second, I was already expecting hot takes like this with the gangs of Night City because we saw it before launch, but obviously it seems like they're specifically angry about the Voodoo Boys with them having Haitian accents, and it is just worth noting that Mike Pondsmith actually commented on outrage over this before launch. I believe it was around E3 2019, in which a couple of journalists made an uproar about this, in which Mike Pondsmith said, the original Voodoo Boys were scathing commentary and cultural appropriation. I love the idea that real practitioners of Voodoo moved in and took back their turf, and they even got the Creole right. So that's just the creator's point of view, and also I just had a feeling that there was going to be outrage about all of the gangs of Night City, but let's keep it on going with this really bad take.
And they all sound like that.
Right, yeah, they do.
And they all sound like that. They all sound like the most stereotypical, I'm making Song of the South 2 or Birth of a Nation 2. Like, this is how I'm gonna make these minority characters. Every Song of the South 2077. Thank you, Jordan.
But then this hot take continues, and I just don't get it at all. Like, Cyberpunk 2077 does have stereotypical characters and gangs, but I think that was kind of the point. And a lot of this wasn't invented by CD Projekt Red, and it's not like they didn't have cultural experts and consultants on staff, because they did, and I just don't get this at all. But let's continue it off so we discuss the rest of this, because it gets worse.
It's all the most derivative, lazy.
Well, now,
Nikki, if you're gonna do racism and you're gonna do future racism, at least do something interesting with it. I don't know how they've managed to be 1960s or 1970s racist in a video game that takes place literally 100 years after that.
Right.
So anyway, this individual's take, it's not like it's something new, because I've seen other people making it. There's actually a big Twitter thread which blew up a little bit, in which one user specifically said, at every step of the first few hours of the the game, anything Japanese is portrayed with antagonism. Arasaka, the Japanese megacorp you robbed from on your first heist, is portrayed as the enemy because of the person of color's source material, because of that's what he built. A radio host makes a jab about Japanese whaling and atom bombs. Well, there was a big bomb that went off in Night City about 50 years ago in the universe. Anyway, he continues, he says, I have yet to see a Japanese character without a thick Japanese accent. Even though Japanese Americans don't all have accents, I understand that Japanese immigrants exist, but are you seriously telling me that there are no Japanese main characters with neutral accents? There is one, it's called Mako. She's actually a pretty major character in Judy's storyline. And then finally they said exactly this, the core issue of the game is that it portrays stereotypes of minorities without commenting on whether or not said stereotype is good or bad. This game stereotypes literally everyone in it, from queer people to Asian people and Haitian people, and yet it doesn't have a single thing to say about any of those stereotypes other than a throwaway line of optional dialogue here or there. And I do love the fact that they're just specifically mentioning the minority characters when specifically there are also white characters which are very much stereotypes, like the whole 6th Street gang is your big old America gang. Like obviously it does have some mixed racial, like I think there are some African American members and some other races within it, but it's mostly white and it's kind of clearly what a stereotypical America gang. But we're not going to mention that because that doesn't prove the point we're trying to make, which is that CDPR bad with minority characters and gangs. Like I get the outrage, I understand the frustration a lot of people are having with Cyberpunk 2077, but some of these hot takes are just quite dumb. Like I saw this with Red Dead Redemption 2 when we talked about it 2 years ago, but feels like Cyberpunk is just getting it even more because people, well, a lot of people are upset right now, so I guess a lot of these hot takes are fine, I suppose, but I personally just don't get it, and I can't get behind some of these bad takes because some of them are just god-awful and really disrespectful to, I think, a game that really did great with its writing and characters, and even the gangs, which yes, there are stereotypes. A lot of them are stereotypes, but that's on purpose. Like the Valentinos, which is mostly Hispanic, that's something that Mike Pondsmith invented. And then also the Arasaka, that's Mike Pondsmith invented that corporation. The Tiger Claws, again, Mike Pondsmith invented that. Anyway, I could go on and on about this, just the fact that I think a lot of people do not understand this franchise and where it actually was invented and what's it about, but regardless, Cyberpunk 2077 has been out 2 weeks, and I think we're all hopeful that this game can make a comeback in 2021. But this is probably where I'll wrap up this video. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts on everything that we did discuss today down in the comment section below. Am I wrong to say that some of these hot takes are just god-awful? Let me know. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video or if you found any informative value, and make sure to follow my other social media accounts for updates on new videos. Links are always down in the description below. I'm most active on Twitter, giving opinions on news that I do not always get into video form, so do make sure to follow me over there. Also check out my Discord for all sorts of discussion on games, and again, thank you for joining. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.